Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something, well, incredibly personal and universal. The mysteries of childhood.
Hmm.
What truly shapes us. How do we become the adults we are? These aren't just academic questions, are they? They're sort of the essence of understanding ourselves, our kids, the world.
Absolutely. And to kick us off, we have these two stories that are, well, frankly, almost unbelievable.
Oh, right.
They
Yeah.
really force you to confront just how profoundly different influences can, warp or optimize development.
Right.
They set the stage perfectly for this deep dive into child psychology.
Okay, let's unpack these. The first one takes us to KwaZulu-Natal. This was back in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Picture this. A boy, maybe 5 years old, spotted living with wild monkeys. He's eventually captured after quite a struggle, actually, and they named him Saturday Mythian just because, well, they caught him on a Saturday.
It's incredible. And Saturday's behavior was just astonishing. Aggressive, broke things, moved like an animal, climbing in and out of windows.
Yeah.
He preferred raw meat, hated clothes, blankets. Utterly rejected them. Even after a decade at a special school, he never learned to speak properly.
Really? A whole decade.
Yeah. Still walked and jumped like a monkey, preferred raw food.
Yeah.
His life ended tragically, very young, only 17. Died in an orphanage fire.
Just heartbreaking. Okay, the second story. We shift gears a bit. Canada, mid-1960s.
Right.
David Reimer, 8 months old, routine circumcision, but there's a terrible accident. His penis was completely removed.
A horrific accident.
Yeah.
And on the advice of a prominent psychologist at the time, his parents made this really profound and now hugely controversial decision.
To raise him as a girl.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They called him Brenda. She, or rather, he raised as she, had plastic surgery at 21 months to create female genitalia. Encouraged to play with dolls, wear dresses.
But it didn't take.
Problems started almost immediately in school. Terrible bullying, profound mental anguish. By 13, Brenda was suicidal.
Oh, no.
When the truth finally came out, he immediately started living as David again. Had reconstructive surgeries, even married, became a stepfather. But the trauma, it lingered. Tragically, at 38, Davy took his own life.
And his twin brother, too, you mentioned?
Yes, his twin had died by suicide just 2 years earlier. It's an incredibly sad story on multiple levels.
The stories are chilling. Absolutely chilling. When you look at Saturday Mathien and David Reimer, what's the first question that jumps out for you as a child psychologist?
For me, it has to be that fundamental question. What shapes us? Is it mostly nature, our genes, our biology, what we're born with?
Right.
Or is it nurture, the environment, how we're raised, our experiences? Or, as seems much more likely, is it this incredibly complex, interwoven dance between the two? These stories just push it to the extreme, don't they?
Yeah.
They make us ask, what helps development? What harms it? And that's our mission today, really, to explore these big questions within child psychology.
And it sounds like a fascinating journey. We're going to look at the goals of child psychology itself.
Yeah, why do we even study this?
Exactly. Then trace how views on kids have, well, radically shifted through history.
Which they really have.
Then map out the stages, the different areas of development, tackle the big debates.
Now, there are some big ones, nature-nurture being just the start.
And finally, explore the major theories, trying to explain it all, including, importantly, perspectives from Africa, which you said are often overlooked.
Definitely. Vital perspectives we need to include. And it's not just academic theory, right? Think about the scale. Childhood globally, but even here in South Africa, roughly a third of our population.
Wow, a third?
Yeah, about 20 million people are under 18. Understanding how they develop helps us understand ourselves, our own kids, the society we live in. It's a kind of essential knowledge for being informed citizens.
Okay, so let's start there. Why do we study child development? What are those big picture goals you mentioned?
Well, it's a science, so it has clear, practical aims. Think of it like, I don't know, being a detective trying to piece together the story of human growth. The first goal is just description, mapping out the typical changes, conception right up to 18.
So what happens when?
Exactly. How does a fetus develop? What's the difference between a 2-year-old and a 16-year-old? How does sexuality emerge at puberty? Just charting that journey meticulously.
And once you've described it, you naturally want to know why, right?
Precisely. Goal number 2, explanation. Uncovering the causes. Why do some kids have language delays? What factors influence prenatal development? How does peer pressure actually impact self-image? We're digging for the why behind the what's.
Makes perfect sense. And if you understand the what and the why, can you then start to maybe predict things?
That's the hope. The third goal is prediction. Based on what we know now, can we make educated guesses about the future? Will drinking or smoking during pregnancy affect the child? Does an aggressive baby become an aggressive teen? Or, will a curious kid, like maybe some of our listeners, grow up to be a scientist? It's about seeing those threads connecting early life to later outcomes. Though I have to say, human behavior is way too complex for any rigid formulas.
Sure. No crystal balls. And the ultimate goal, what's the big payoff?
The payoff, the ultimate goal, is improving well-being, making positive changes, preventing problems.
Right.
Think about it. Informing pregnant women about risks, helping teachers deal with bullying effectively, guiding parents away from harsh punishment.
Real-world impact.
Absolutely. The research has a direct, profound impact on millions of kids' lives. That's the driving force.
And understanding those goals really highlights how far we've come. Because if we look back historically, wow, views on children were frankly pretty horrific in many ancient cultures.
Horrific is the word. Children often seen as property, nothing more.
Which led to things like infanticide.
Yes, the deliberate killing of infants. Often for reasons like the wrong gender or having twins, which was sometimes seen as unnatural or burdensome. And archaeological finds right here in South Africa suggest this happened as far back as 5,000 years ago.
5,000 years.
And sadly, records show it continued even after colonists arrived. It was a brutal reality.
And the Middle Ages, say 500 to 1500 AD, that wasn't much better, was it? The whole idea of childhood as we know it didn't really exist.
Largely ignored. From age 3 or 4, kids were basically seen as miniature adults, expected to work, take on responsibilities.
Even working in mines in Europe, you said?
Yes, alongside adults. Look at paintings from the time kids are dressed like adults, doing adult things. It's a stark contrast to how we see childhood now.
So when did things start to shift?
A big shift started around the 17th century in Europe, largely thanks to philosophers like John Locke in Britain.
Locke, okay.
He pushed this radical idea of the tabula rasa, the blank slate.
Right, I've heard of that.
His argument was that a child's mind is shaped by experience. Your environment, education, interactions, that's what determines who you become. Challenging the old ideas of inherent sin or fixed traits.
That sounds like progress, philosophically at least. But did it immediately change how children were treated?
Not overnight, sadly. Locke planted crucial seeds, but the rise of factory systems, for example, created this huge demand for cheap child labor.
Ah, the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. Children became virtual slaves in factories and mines. Mortality rates were shockingly high. Less than half of children reached age 5. Disease, infection, abandonment. It was still a brutal time, even with new ideas emerging.
And this wasn't just a European problem?
No, unfortunately not. Similar suffering was widespread in sub-Saharan Africa. For centuries, child slavery was common intertribal raids, trafficking children overseas, especially to the USA. And while it was officially abolished in most places by the late 19th century, modern slavery is still a horrifying reality. Estimates suggest 10 million victims today, and about a quarter of them are children, mainly in Africa and Asia. The echoes are still with us.
So moving into the 20th century, children were still often seen as property, few rights.
Largely, yes. Think of those old sayings, speak when spoken to. Children should be seen and not heard. Critical thinking wasn't exactly encouraged.
But those philosophical seeds Locke planted, they started to grow.
Slowly, yes. We saw the beginnings of children's rights movements. There was a conference on African children in Geneva back in 1931, a significant step, but widespread change took time.
And here in South Africa, during apartheid, 1948 to 1994, the situation was particularly bleak for many children.
Stark, systemic discrimination. Black children faced massive disadvantages in education, healthcare, leading directly to much higher rates of disease and death compared to white children. It was deliberate, institutionalized harm.
Then came the shift post-apartheid, 1994.
A huge shift. The new government committed to ending discrimination, promoting children's rights. Endorsing the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child in '96 was a landmark moment.
Which is legally binding globally.
Yes. It ushered in a new era of legal protection and advocacy. A massive step forward.
Challenges remain, even with legal frameworks.
Absolutely. Significant impact, yes. But the situation for children, both worldwide and here in South Africa, is still concerning. We still see forced marriage, sexual exploitation, illegal child labor, child soldiers.
It's a sobering list.
It is. UNICEF put it starkly. To be a child in South Africa is to walk a fragile path to adulthood. highlights the ongoing struggle. Despite the progress, it's a constant effort.
So, given this huge, complex journey of growth, how do psychologists even start to map it out? You mentioned dividing it into stages, even though it's continuing.
Exactly. It's useful, even if it's a simplification, like drawing stages on a map for a long journey.
Helps make sense of it.
Right. It helps us understand, roughly, when kids are ready for certain things, like school or making certain decisions, and helps identify potential developmental delays if a child seems significantly behind their peers.
Okay, so what are these generally accepted stages?
We start right at the beginning, the prenatal stage.
Yeah.
Conception to birth. That's broken down further into germinal, embryonic, and fetal periods.
Right.
Then the neonatal stage, the first month or so in infancy, which covers the first 2 years. Big changes happen then.
I bet. Then what?
Early childhood, ages 2 to 6, language explodes, play becomes central. Then middle childhood, from about 6 up to puberty around age 12, school years mostly.
And finally?
Adolescence, puberty right up to age 18, a period of massive physical, cognitive, and social transformation.
And you mentioned a difference between the legal definition of a child and the psychological one.
Yeah, it's a useful distinction. Legally, in South Africa and many places, you're a child under 18. Psychologically, though, we see adolescence as this distinct, crucial transition phase. It's not just older childhood, it's the bridge to adulthood.
Okay. And within these stages, development isn't just one thing happening. You talked about different domains.
Exactly. Humans are complex. We look at different areas, but they're all interconnected, constantly influencing each other, like threads in a tapestry.
So what are the main domains?
First, physical development. Genetics, brain growth, motor skills, walking, running, catching hormones, nutrition, all the biological stuff. It's crucial because physical well-being impacts psychological well-being and vice versa.
Makes sense. What's next?
Cognitive development. This is all about thinking, how we acquire information, process it, interpret it, store it, use it to understand the world. Perception, learning, memory, language, intelligence. How our minds work.
Then personality development.
Right. The totality of who someone is. Their enduring characteristics. Some inborn, like temperament, some acquired. Self-concept, self-esteem, identity, how we express emotions. What makes each person unique.
Oh, the last one.
Social development. How we learn to interact with others. Abilities, attitudes, relationships, behavior in social contexts. Attachment to caregivers, friendships, moral development, even spirituality fits in here. All these domains are constantly interacting, shaping the whole person.
Which leads us nicely into the great debates. You said these controversies are actually important for the field.
Absolutely vital. Passive acceptance of ideas leads to stagnation in any science. Debates push us forward, force us to test ideas, refine theories. The goal is to research until we reach a solid consensus, then maybe move to the next big question.
Okay, so the big one, the classic, nature or nurture. Those opening stories, Saturday Matheny and David Reimer, really bring this into sharp focus.
They absolutely do. Saturday's wild behavior versus David's struggle against an imposed gender identity, despite intense environmental pressure. It screams nature versus nurture.
So, just to be clear, nature is the biological stuff, genes, hormones, brain structure.
Yes, the inborn biological factors.
And nurture is everything else, the environment.
Pretty much parenting, poverty or wealth, culture, schooling, peer groups, the physical environment, all those external influences. The core question is, which is more powerful in shaping us?
And you said this is hard to resolve.
Notoriously difficult. For one thing, it gets tangled up with deep political or religious beliefs sometimes. People have strong feelings about it.
I can see that.
Also, human behavior is so incredibly varied. You can almost always find an example to support either side, which can lead to endless arguments.
And proving cause and effect. That sounds tricky too.
Extremely. If a child experiences trauma and later gets depressed, was it just the trauma? Or was there a genetic vulnerability triggered by it? Many kids experience trauma and don't get depressed. Some kids in great environments do. It's complex. Like saying diet drinks cause obesity because lots of overweight people drink them. Correlation isn't causation.
So where does the field stand now? Is it still nature versus nurture?
Not really. The consensus now isn't about which is more important, but how they constantly interact. It's nature and nurture.
Ah, okay.
I think of it like this. Heredity, nature, might set the potential range for something, like height or maybe even temperament. But the environment, nurture, determines where within that range you actually end up. It's a dynamic interplay. Saturday Matheny is a perfect example. His biology was profoundly shaped by his unique environment with the monkeys. They're inseparable.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the next big debate?
Continuity or discontinuity. Is development a smooth, gradual process, like a tree slowly getting bigger? Or does it happen in distinct, abrupt stages, like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly?
I can see arguments for both.
Exactly. Learning language seems pretty continuous, right? Kids gradually add words, improve grammar. But puberty feels quite discontinuous, sudden hormonal surges, growth spurts, new social dynamics.
So it's probably a bit of both.
It seems that way. Depends on what aspect of development you're looking at. Some changes are gradual, others are more step-like.
And does this relate to predicting future behavior? Can we reliably tell what someone will be like as an adult based on their childhood?
Well, it's tricky. Past and present behavior is usually the best predictor we have. But people change, sometimes dramatically, due to new experiences or conscious effort. Sometimes they stay remarkably consistent. There's just too much complexity for rigid formulas. No guarantees.
Which raises another question. Are kids passive or active in their own development? Are they just shaped by their environment, like clay? Or do they actively shape themselves?
That's a great way to put it. Going back to Locke's blank slate, is it only the environment writing on it? Or do kids hold the chalk sometimes too? Maybe even erase things?
Haha. Right.
Most psychologists agree children are active participants. Think about it.
Yeah.
A child with a difficult temperament might elicit more negative reactions from adults, which then shapes their environment differently than a child with an easy temperament.
So the child influences the environment that influences them.
Exactly. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Or consider a child who actively chooses not to engage in school, despite encouragement. That choice shapes their future just as much as a child who strives for success. Children interpret experiences uniquely, make choices, follow their own drives. They aren't just passive recipients.
Okay. And the final big debate you flagged, universality or cultural context. Do all kids everywhere follow the same developmental path, or does culture make a big difference?
This is a huge one, especially in recent decades. For a long time, psychology was very Western-centric. Most research was done on what we now call weird populations.
Weird.
Yeah, it's an acronym. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. That group only represents maybe 10% of the world's population.
Wow, only 10%.
Right. So a lot of what we thought were universal truths about child development were actually based on a very narrow, specific cultural group. As one African scholar, Mian Salmoning, pointed out, the field might look very different if childhood had been discovered or first studied in, say, Africa or Asia.
That's a really powerful point. We might have missed so much.
We definitely did. But as the field became more global, the crucial role of culture became undeniable. Culture, a group's shared beliefs, norms, customs, way of life, profoundly influences development. It shapes everything from cognitive skills to social behavior. Human development is largely a cultural process.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about collectivist cultures, common in many parts of Africa and Asia, where the group's needs often come before individual desires. Contrast that with individualistic Western cultures, where personal achievement and independence are highly valued. These different values shape parenting, education, everything.
Like how children's chores are viewed differently.
Exactly. In many African contexts, children contributing to household duties from a young age is seen as essential vocational training, building responsibility, integrating them into the community. In some Western contexts, the same level of chores might be seen as inappropriate child labor. Neither view is inherently right or wrong, they're just culturally different.
And you mentioned culture can even influence biological things like motor skills.
Yes, some cultures actively encourage early walking or sitting, providing specific practice opportunities. And children in those cultures often reach those milestones a bit earlier than in cultures where it's not emphasized as much. Nurture influencing nature's timeline, in a way.
But we need to be careful not to stereotype, right? Culture isn't everything.
Absolutely crucial point. Differences within a culture can be huge, often bigger than differences between cultures. And culture isn't static. It changes, evolves, especially in multicultural places like South Africa. Plus, every individual is unique, a blend of countless influences, not just a product of their culture. We need to keep that individual uniqueness in mind, always.
Okay, so we have these stages, domains, these big debates. It's clear we need some frameworks to try and organize all this complexity. That's where the theories come in.
Exactly. A theory is basically an organized set of ideas. It tries to explain the facts we have, predict what might happen, and stimulate new questions, new research. It's like a map for understanding development.
And no single map shows everything.
Precisely. Just like scientists in other fields disagree, psychologists have different viewpoints, different theories they favor. But these different perspectives are what drive progress. It's healthy.
Okay, let's start with the biological perspective. What's the core idea here?
The core idea is that biology is primary. Behavior is mainly determined by genes, the brain, hormones. They don't completely ignore the environment, but they see biological factors as the fundamental drivers.
What are some theories within this perspective?
Well, early on, there was Arnold Gesell's maturational theory. He believed development just unfolds according to a preset biological timetable, like a flower blooming. Experience mattered very little in his view.
Does that hold up today?
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
We know environment plays a much bigger role, but it was an early attempt. More influential is ethological theory, linked to Konrad Lorenz.
Lorenz, the guy with the geese.
That's the one, imprinting. Ethology looks at development from an evolutionary angle. Behaviors are seen as adaptive, they have survival value, like a baby crying ensures a caregiver comes. Lorenz talked about critical periods, specific windows where certain learning must happen, like the goslings imprinting in that first day. If it doesn't happen then, it won't happen.
Are there human examples?
The thalidomide tragedy is a stark one. Pregnant women taking that drug during a specific critical period of limb development led to severe birth defects. We also talk about sensitive periods, less rigid windows where learning is easiest but still possible later. Like learning a second language is easiest between, say, 7 months and 3 years. But adults can still learn, it's just harder.
And evolutionary theory itself, Darwin.
Right. Based on Darwin's natural selection, it suggests many human behaviors are the result of successful adaptations over generations. Our social nature, for instance, sticking together, helped early humans survive, find food, protect each other. It also helps explain our long childhood. It allows time for complex brain development and learning social rules, giving us an adaptive edge.
What about modern biological approaches?
Oh, there's lots happening. Neuropsychology uses brain imaging, like fMRI, to see how brain structures and functions relate to behavior and development. Behavioral genetics studies the role of genes, looking at things like twin studies to untangle genetic and environmental influences. And psychoendocrinology focuses on hormones and behavior, how they influence mood, stress, sexuality, aggression.
It sounds incredibly important, but what's the main criticism?
The main critique is often about overemphasis. Reducing complex human thoughts, feelings, and choices down to just biology can feel too simplistic, too mechanistic. Most agree it's a vital piece of the puzzle, but not the whole puzzle.
Okay. Let's shift to the psychodynamic perspective. This goes back to Freud, right? Unconscious drives.
Exactly. The core idea is that our behavior is powerfully influenced by unconscious psychological motives, drives, urges, conflicts we might not even be aware of.
Freud really shook things up, didn't he? Suggesting unconscious desires and early childhood experiences shape us.
He absolutely did. He proposed that personality develops as we resolve these unconscious conflicts. He talked about the id, our primitive pleasure-seeking instincts.
The devil on your shoulder.
Sort of. Then the ego, the rational part, trying to mediate between the id's demands and the real world. And the superego, our conscience, our internalized sense of morality, right and wrong.
And he had those psychosexual stages, oral, anal.
Yes. He believed our psychic energy, or libido, focuses on different body zones at different ages. Problems could arise, he thought, if needs were unmet or overindulged at a stage, leading to a fixation that could affect adult personality.
Freud gets a lot of criticism, though, right? Hard to test scientifically. Maybe overfocused on sex in early life.
Definitely. Researching the unconscious is inherently difficult. His reliance on adult patients recalling childhood memories is problematic. And yes, the emphasis on sex in early childhood is often criticized.
Yes.
But his impact was revolutionary. He made us realize early experiences can have lasting effects. He highlighted that children experience internal conflict wanting something versus knowing they shouldn't. And maybe most importantly, he sparked incredible debate and research that paved the way for so many other ideas.
Like Erik Erikson's theory.
Exactly. Erikson built on Freud but shifted the focus. His psychosocial theory emphasizes psychological and social challenges across the entire lifespan, not just childhood sexual drives. He proposed 8 stages.
Each with a crisis.
Right. Each stage involves a psychosocial crisis, a key challenge. Successfully navigating it leads to a positive outcome, a basic strength or virtue. For example, infancy is trust versus mistrust. Resolve it well, you develop hope.
And adolescence.
That's identity versus identity confusion. The virtue gained is fidelity, being true to yourself, finding your place. Erikson saw life as a continuous journey of growth, with each stage building on the last.
Does Erikson face similar criticisms to Freud? Like lack of empirical evidence?
To some extent, yes. Testing the stages empirically is challenging, and some argue it doesn't fully account for cultural variations. But Erickson is widely praised for capturing the sweep of personality development across life and for inspiring huge amounts of research, especially on identity. He showed us development doesn't stop at childhood.
Okay, moving on. The learning theory perspective. This came partly from dissatisfaction with psychodynamic ideas, more scientific.
Yes, a key driver was wanting something more measurable, more objective. The core idea here is that behavior is learned primarily from the environment. Focus on what you can see and quantify, not hidden unconscious drives.
So who are the key figures here? Watson.
John B. Watson, often called the father of behaviorism, he was inspired by Pavlov's dog's classical conditioning, associating stimuli.
And he did that famous or infamous experiment with little Albert.
Yes, showed how fear could be conditioned. Paired a white rat, which Albert initially liked, with a loud, scary noise. Soon, Albert was afraid of the rat and even other furry things. Ethically dubious today, but a powerful demonstration of environmental learning.
And Watson made that bold claim, give me a dozen healthy infants.
He did. And I'll train them to be anything: doctor, lawyer, beggar, man, thief. It's often quoted to show extreme environmentalism, though in other writings he did acknowledge heredity. He wasn't completely ignoring nature.
Then Skinner came along, operant conditioning.
B.F. Skinner, yes. His focus was operant conditioning. We learn through consequences. Behavior followed by a reward is more likely to be repeated. Behavior followed by punishment is less likely. Simple, powerful idea. Praise for homework. More homework gets done. Time out for hitting. Less hitting occurs.
But learning isn't just about direct rewards and punishments, is it? We learn from watching others.
Exactly. That led to Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory. He showed kids learn hugely through observation, imitation, modeling. Watching a sibling get praised for sharing might make a child more likely to share.
So you don't have to experience the consequence yourself.
Right. Bandura later refined this, adding cognitive factors. We don't just blindly imitate. We choose who to imitate based on expectations, values, perceived status. We think about it.
And he introduced the agentic perspective. That sounds important.
It really is. The idea that we are agents in our own lives. We're not just passive recipients of environmental forces. We're self-organizing, proactive. We contribute to our own development through our choices and interpretations. It's an empowering view.
And self-efficacy comes from Bandura, too.
Yes, a huge contribution. Self-efficacy is your belief in your own ability to succeed in specific situations or accomplish a task. Can I do this? That belief comes from past successes, mastery experiences, watching others succeed, vicarious experiences, encouragement from others, social persuasion, and how we interpret our own physical and emotional states. It's fundamental for motivation, resilience, trying new things.
Learning theories sound very practical. What are the criticisms?
They've been hugely valuable for highlighting environmental influence and promoting scientific rigor. But critics sometimes say they overemphasize the environment, potentially downplaying biology. Some argue they don't fully capture deeper developmental changes across the lifespan or adequately address complex cultural nuances in learning.
Okay, next up, the cognitive-developmental perspective. This is about thinking. Piaget is the big name here.
He absolutely is. Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist, revolutionized how we see children's minds. He believed kids are like little scientists, actively constructing their understanding of the world. They don't just absorb info, they create and revise theories.
And his key idea was that kids think differently at different ages, not just less.
Exactly. He proposed 4 distinct stages of cognitive development, each characterized by a different way of thinking.
Okay, can you remind us of the stages?
Sure. Sensorimotor stage, birth to about 2 years. Understanding through senses and actions. Big achievement. Object permanence, knowing things exist even when hidden.
Peekaboo.
Exactly. Then the preoperational stage, roughly 2 to 6 or 7. Language and symbols explode, but thinking is often egocentric, hard to see others' perspectives, and animistic, giving feelings to inanimate objects.
Like thinking their teddy bear is sad.
Right. Then concrete operational stage, about 7 to 11. Logical thinking starts, but it's tied to concrete, real-world objects and experiences. They can reason about things they can see and touch.
And finally?
Formal operational stage, from around 12 onwards. This is where abstract thought emerges. Hypothetical reasoning, deductive logic, thinking about possibilities, justice, morality in a more complex way. What if thinking really takes off?
Piaget also had concepts like schemas, assimilation, accommodation.
Yes, key ideas.
Yeah.
Schemas are like mental file folders, categories we use to organize knowledge. Adaptation is how we adjust schemas. We assimilate new information by fitting it into existing schemas. We accommodate by changing existing schemas or creating new ones when information doesn't fit. And equilibration is the drive for balance between assimilation and accommodation, constantly refining our understanding.
Piaget sounds hugely influential. Any criticisms?
Yes. Some criticize his methods, often based on observing his own children. And later research suggests he might have underestimated what younger children are capable of cognitively. But his contribution was enormous. He essentially created the field of cognitive development and inspired decades of research.
And within this cognitive perspective, there's also information processing theory.
Right. This approach uses the computer as a metaphor for the human mind.
Input, process, output.
Basically, yes. It looks at the mental hardware, things like sensory memory, working memory, long-term memory stores, and the mental software, the cognitive processes like attention, encoding information, retrieving it later.
Like how we pay attention to things or remember phone numbers.
Exactly. A key concept here is executive function. This is like the CEO of the brain planning, monitoring progress towards goals, inhibiting distractions, shifting tasks. It's heavily linked to the prefrontal cortex, which develops throughout childhood and adolescence.
That explains why teenagers get better at planning than toddlers.
Definitely. This theory also talks about the child as theorist, kids actively building naive theories about how the physical world works, physics, about living things, biology, and about people's minds and intentions, psychology, including theory of mind.
How does thinking change, according to this view?
Primarily through brain maturation, which allows for more efficient processing, bigger memory capacity, and better strategies, also through acquiring more knowledge and experience.
What are the critiques here? Too much like a computer.
Now, that's a common one. Critics argue the computer analogy might miss the richness of human emotion, motivation, social context, and unique individual experiences that don't fit neatly into an input-process-output model.
Okay, final perspective. The contextual perspective. This sounds like it brings everything together. Environment, culture.
Really emphasizes the environment, yes. The core idea is that development can only be understood within the complex social and cultural context it occurs in. Direct and indirect influences, all interacting.
Vygotsky is important here.
Lev Vygotsky, yes. His sociocultural theory stressed that adults convey cultural beliefs, customs, and skills to children through social interaction, especially language.
And he had that idea. The zone of
proximal development, ZPD, that sweet spot where learning happens. Tasks a child can't quite do alone, but can do with guidance from a more knowledgeable other, an adult, or even a peer. Scaffolding learning.
And Bronfenbrenner, the nesting dolls analogy.
Yuri Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic model. He saw the child embedded in layers of interacting systems.
Okay, break those down.
The microsystem is the immediate setting. Family, school, playground, peers, teachers, direct interactions.
Got it.
The mesosystem is the connections between microsystems, like how parent-teacher communication affects the child, or how experiences at home influence behavior at school.
Okay, links.
Then the exosystem, social settings that affect the child indirectly, parents' workplace stress, availability of community health services, media influences. The child isn't in these settings, but they feel the effects.
Right. And the biggest layer?
The macrosystem, the overarching culture. Values, laws, economic system, political climate, social norms. It shapes all the inner layers.
And he added time.
Yes, the chronosystem, the dimension of time, how influences change over the child's life and across historical time. Losing a parent means something different at age 5 versus 15. Growing up during a war versus peacetime. It all matters.
It's a very comprehensive model. Any drawbacks?
Some critics feel it might portray the child too much as just a product of systems, potentially underplaying individual agency or biological factors. But it's incredibly useful for understanding the sheer complexity of influences.
And now, crucially, let's talk about Nitzemaneng's African perspective. You said this offers vital insights often missed.
Absolutely vital. It's only been more widely documented relatively recently, partly due to reliance on oral traditions and lack of research funding historically, but is grounded in a distinct, holistic African worldview.
Holistic how?
It sees the individual deeply interconnected with nature, the community, ancestors, and a spiritual realm. There's often a hierarchical view. Inanimate objects, plants, animals, humans, ancestors, God. Humans are part of this larger cosmic order.
And spirituality is central.
Hugely important. Behavior isn't just psychological, it's spiritual. Maintaining balance and harmony with spiritual forces is key. Traditional healers often play a role in restoring that balance, not just treating physical illness.
And the community focus. Ubuntu.
Yes, profoundly community-centric. Values like cooperation, interdependence, communal responsibility are paramount, embodied in concepts like Ubuntu, I am because we are, and because we are, I am. Your identity and well-being are tied to the groups.
How does this view shape ideas about development?
Niesland calls it social ontogenesis development embedded in social and ecological contexts. He describes phases of selfhood, spiritual before birth, social after naming, and ancestral after death.
And developmental stages look different, too.
Yes. He outlines stages based more on social and physiological markers like teething, starting chores, initiation, marriage, rather than just chronological age. Development involves learning through participation, taking on responsibilities, responsible intelligence, being able to fulfill your roles, contribute, give, and receive support is highly valued.
The sources also mention the importance of names.
Immense significance in many African cultures. Naming ceremonies connect the child to lineage, community. Names often carry deep meaning, reflecting circumstances, hopes, character. They're fundamental to identity.
And Nshangas's work reinforces this communal idea.
Yes, emphasizing interdependence, links to ancestors. Children are raised within this worldview, learning reciprocity, giving back, contributing as part of their development. Community resilience is key, especially when facing adversity.
This brings up that tension you mentioned earlier about decolonizing education versus integrating global knowledge, especially in a place like South Africa.
It's a critical, ongoing debate. How do you dismantle the historical dominance of Western perspectives, Eurocentrism, and give proper space to indigenous African knowledge systems while still engaging with and benefiting from valuable insights from across the globe? It's about finding a balance, integration, not isolation, building on the best knowledge wherever it comes from.
So after walking through all these different theories, biological, psychodynamic, learning, cognitive, contextual, African perspectives, which one is right or best?
The million-dollar question. The truth is, there's no single best theory. Scientists often disagree, influenced by their training, their focus, their own cultural lens.
So what do most psychologists do?
Many adopt an eclectic or integrative approach. They don't rigidly stick to one theory. They draw on the useful concepts and insights from multiple theories, depending on the specific child, the specific question, the specific context. It's about having a rich, varied toolbox.
Like using different viewpoints to see the whole landscape.
Exactly that. The biological lens highlights genes and brain. Psychodynamic alerts us to unconscious influences and early relationships. Learning theories show the power of the environment and observation. Cognitive theories map how thinking changes. Contextual and African perspectives embed the child firmly within their culture and interacting systems.
So using them all gives a richer picture.
A much richer, more complete understanding. No single theory has all the answers, but each offers a valuable lens illuminating different facets of that incredible, complex journey of childhood.
What an incredible journey this has been, too. We've covered so much ground. From those shocking opening stories through history, the debates, all these diverse theories.
It's a lot to take in, but understanding these different lenses really is empowering, isn't it? It helps us make sense of the kids in our lives, maybe understand ourselves a bit better, and think more critically about the societies we're building. It moves us beyond just surface observations.
Definitely. So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. Given everything we've discussed, especially the profound influence of culture highlighted by the African perspectives, take a moment to think. What specific aspects of your own cultural background do you feel have most significantly shaped who you are today? And how might that awareness change how you interact with or understand children from backgrounds different from your own?
A great question to ponder.
Absolutely. Think about it and keep diving deep.